Hey, everybody, welcome to the SaaS Founder Conversations with successful SaaS founders who share their journeys, learnings, and insights along the way. I'm Tony Zayas, your host, and today's guest is Josh Fraser. He is the founder and CEO of Estated. Estated offers quick and easy access to comprehensive property data on over 150 million residential and non-residential properties across the U.S. So with that, let me bring Josh on. Hey, Josh, how you doing?
Very good. How are you?
Awesome. Real well, thank you. So I read the brief descriptor, but tell us more about Estated. Tell us, how do you describe the business?
You did a pretty good job there. So at the end of the day, we provide, if you were to go and look at Zillow as a listing right now, you're going to have all that information on the home. That is usually considered MLS data, but what Estated provides is public record data. So we have every single historical sale, all the owners, mortgage information on the home, a much deeper dive into the structural information as well, more boundary, address, much more accurate valuations, I would say, than the Zestimate. And we've been collecting this data on our own. We purchase it from some of the major companies like CoreLogic and Black Knight. And we amalgamate all of that and we provide it to mostly insurance and lending companies. They have to do this to power their automation and workflows nowadays. Obviously, everything's going digital. If you were to rewind 5 years, you'd see that if you went and renewed your insurance policy, you'd have to go into an office, look at 100 pieces of paper, not really understand it. Now it's all done on an iPad at a coffee shop or a DocuSign online. So we've helped them power and make those workflows a lot easier. And that's what's helped get Estated to where it is today.
So is it those insurance companies that are the customers? Are those the
Exactly
audience? Yeah.
Estated is purely B2B. We don't really have any B2C customers. I was in the B2C space with data previous to this, and I'm still part of a company that's involved in that. But we realized that the B2B industry was a funner one to be in. A little bit more challenging, but much larger contracts, a lot more revenue there.
Yeah, I hear you. I love to get the origin story. So where did the concept come from, and how did you turn the idea, into a business?
Yeah, I got my kind of kick at internet and marketing in high school. We started with Google AdWords back in 2007 and 2008. So I was always kind of drawn towards internet advertising. Started with affiliate marketing and grew from there. In 2013, though, I had left the company I was working with, managing AdWords campaigns, and bought my first house, made some money, which was fantastic. And when I bought my first house, I realized that the data I was looking at for my house was really out of date and archaic. And I was a little bit frustrated by it, to be honest. And so I'd worked with Carfax previously, and they had been acquired for I think it was $4.5 billion. And so they had been an account we worked with. I really understood their business model. And I was like, why doesn't someone just do Carfaxes for homes, make it look pretty? That was kind of the light bulb moment.
Yeah.
And, it's always a good when you can explain your business idea to your mother. My mother actually understood that one. The AdWords stuff, she had no clue what I was ever doing. So I was pretty fired up when the Carfax for homes came to mind. And it really did work. It was kind of one of those luck of the draw things where it was we built a website, we bought some data, we started creating these PDF reports. You could buy them for $20, very consumer driven. And that thing scaled up 2015 to 2017 very quickly. Hundreds of thousands of customers. But it was only $20 to $50 reports, right? Lots of turnover, lots of refunds. My fence isn't included on this. I don't know. You have too many bedrooms. So it was nitpicky, but it was also a massive learning experience. We learned a lot about the value of the data, but where it was also bad. When you're looking at, there's about 125 million residential homes in the United States, along with about 35 million commercial multifamily things. So when you look at that much data, there's obviously going to be tons of errors in it. We joke, it's everyone says big data is king, but it's really small data. It's where it gets intricate and where it gets valuable. And so with that, we were building up the Carfax for Homes business under Data Nerds. And then we got invited in 2017 to go to Techstars in Boulder, Colorado. And so if people aren't familiar, Techstars is like a global accelerator. It's like I think it's a 14 or 15 week program. And you meet up with 10 companies and you just get like the download of how to do a startup. From incredibly smart people too. There's amazing mentors that we've gained from there. And we went through Techstars, and the entire pitch was, how do we shift this B2C business to B2B? And that was where Estated had come. I bought the domain name years ago because I was just always obsessed with having short domain names. It's easier to create SEO with, and always having a good .com helps. And so from there, we fleshed out the idea. We raised in early 2018, after the program ended, we raised $3 million from Foundry Group and Techstars. And that was kind of like our seed round funding for Estated. Some people call it Series A. We were bootstrapped up into that day, so I considered it a seed round. It was maybe a bigger seed round back in 2018. But we raised that money. We failed a whole ton of times trying to build APIs and get bulk data files out into the market because we had no clue what we were doing. We were used to selling these one-off reports versus now we were selling, I think last month we had a little over 15 million API calls hit Estated.
Wow.
So building scale and the engineering technicalities that go into that were a big learning, but then also how to sell the data in different types of formats. People would give us 2 million addresses and append all the property data we have. How do we actually like separate out the data? Because kind of my core philosophy is very much the small data is worth more than the big data. And so how do we parse the data for so many different properties and so many different types of data to make it valuable to the customer and make it price appropriate? And I think Estated's pretty much doubled every year since we've started. 2019 we started doubling. I'd say we were kind of building out that product and MVP in 2018. But yeah, it's been a long journey, tons of failures on product. But I think where we are today is we kind of have these data files in market. We have a pay as you go and tons of different APIs where you can access different types of data.
Wow, super interesting. Just in you telling that story, what were some of the challenges that you faced as you kind of shifted the business from delivering reports to really the API side of things? That's a pretty drastic shift in kind of what you're delivering. Did that present challenges? What did it look like? How did you work through those?
Endless challenges. I still don't think we're through them yet. They pop up all the time. So I'd say one of the biggest ones was pricing. And I think Estated's really kind of shown up as a new competitor within the space due to that. Yeah. We made very SaaS pricing. So we have like $500 all the way up to $5,000 a month on tiered plans. So if you want to look up 5,000 properties a month. So a good example of people who look up 5,000 properties a month are like small-time real estate investors, the window cleaning company in small Dayton, Ohio or something that only wants to know a handful of houses that are above 5,000 square feet. Little things like that we find are like the smaller clients. But then we can look at clients like AirDNA and some of the larger MLSs in the United States, and they look up millions of properties every single month. Yeah. So learning how to tier and have that sliding scale of this customer A business needs to look up 5,000 properties versus customer B needs to look up 2 million, and having that scale in between of like where they fit. We're still constantly iterating with pricing and how we get to something that's all inclusive and works for everyone, but it's you can't always make everyone happy. So I'd say like pricing was a huge part of the challenge, and it continues to be today. But, we have hundreds of customers now, and, we get really good feedback on it. The other thing I'd say about working with Estated is we always wanted to make it that the quality of our data was very transparent. The larger companies, it's a black box, and this doesn't go with my philosophy. I'm like, open the kimono, show us what you got. It's data. People are paying for it. They should know ahead of time what's available. And then speed. I was always just, I don't know if it's our generation nowadays, but it's like we're used to, it's so fast. When I have this on my phone on me, I don't know if it's in the video, but it's like I can look up anything at any time in a millisecond. And working with some of these companies that we bought data from, it takes 6 months. 6 months to get through a contract, get through the contract. But before like day one conversation to that data was actually in my hands, 6 months.
Wow.
And with us, we were like, we can knock this out in 48 hours. And so that's been huge.
Are there any other players, or were there any other players doing similar?
Yeah, there's a little bit of competition in the space. I'd say Atom Data being our biggest competitor. Black Knight, CoreLogic, First American are the three like multi-billion-dollar companies in the industry. And then we have, those are really the only ones that come up to the top of my mind. There's some really cool startups out there nowadays. House Canary, but they pivoted, but really, really smart founders over there. Same thing with Cherry, geniuses on that team, big fans, but very focused on a different type of product and different type of business model. So they have some of the same data, but I think we've always come in as like that SMB, small to medium sized business. We'll work with a Walmart and a State Farm like their clients, but at the end of the day, that's not really our target. We're trying to go for the SMB, very SaaS driven, 500, 1,000, 2,000 a month. That's what we want to hammer on. We love the recurring revenue. And we're constantly learning, but I know that we've definitely come a long way in the competitive market that we're in a very short period of time.
Yeah, very cool. How did you come to find that sweet spot, like the SMBs, and like define that as your target audience and make that part of your market positioning?
Great question. So we kind of have always focused on 5 buckets of customers. There's insurance, which pay the most and are the hardest to work with because quality of data is absolutely imperative. So they can be pretty big headaches when it comes to any sort of data quality issue, but they pay the most money for data. So they've always kind of been an area we focused on. And where we found our sweet spot was not the Prudentials and Liberties. State Farm is a client, but like we always found it with like Kin Insurance, Hippo Insurance, Lemonade, OB Risk. We found that the venture-backed 10 million mark, once they get to there, that's where Stated fits in perfectly because of the speed, the accessibility, and just the transparency. So we really loved kind of that venture side of the insurance market versus the old, like archaic, massive players.
Yeah.
So we found a sweet spot there. Same thing with lending and mortgages. Real estate has all kinds of different use cases. That was always a bucket where I think we have a lot of customers in. Home services is a new one that we're absolutely obsessed with. Like we have a lawn care company that looks up, I think, 80,000, 90,000 properties a month, and they do instant quotes. So you type your address in, they verify the address with the Stated, they then check the lot size, subtract the size of the house, and it's just an instant quote. It's not perfect, but it's like, you get a quote in a millisecond on an app and you can have your lawn cut in like, I don't know how many cities it is in the US, but it's scaling.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. A lot of the big HVAC companies that we work with, they know what the house needs ahead of time because they have this information. Solar panel quoters, like that's always a growing industry in the US. So we've had some success there as well. And then the last one, and probably my least favorite to work with, is utility companies. And so it's a broad range, but we kind of know that we've always had these 5 markets that our data fits into. And, we take what we can get. The way that we acquire leads as well is we do have good organic traffic and we do lots of content, but we've also always had a good presence in pay-per-click marketing because that's what I've been doing since I was in high school.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
So that's not as targeted. That's just like, did you want property data? Mm-hmm. And any lead can come in at that time. So that's always been like a huge, I'd say, kind of advantage for us because my team has some skills in that.
That's great. Why are those utility companies such a pain in the ass?
Extreme budgeting processes, like the wildest budgeting processes, utility companies for some reason. And just like every hoop you could ever imagine you have to jump through.
Okay. Yeah. That makes them difficult for sure.
It's just not as fun, you want a seamless process. Like I'd say our biggest client that is stated is Swiss Re. They do like 55 billion a year in revenue, massive reinsurance company. Like they work with every large insurance company globally that you've ever heard of. And I can't tell you how seamless my relationship has been with them.
That's awesome.
Like we're like a year 4 now, and they've just been the best partner I could ever dream of, and so easy to work with. And I had to go through the ringer for the first 3 months, but once I got to the right people, it was like they made my life so easy. They're happy, we're happy, and we continue to work together really well. So insurance is the big one.
So alongside, going down that path of like client satisfaction, like what's the process you have in place? And like early on, I'm sure you were like probably having a lot of conversations with your customers, but what does that look like now when you onboard a client? How do you get the feedback? How do you make sure they're happy?
Yeah, I had a funny story with like my head engineer who I've worked with for like 7 or 8 years now. And it was just like yesterday. We're talking to one of our clients on the phone, and I was like, this other company we've been in discussions with was like, how often do you go see your clients? And like, they were like, we go see them every like 6 months. And I was like, I've never met a single one of my clients. So client satisfaction in our world has always been digital. Most of my team is in Canada as well. And almost every single one of our clients, I think, is in the US. So maybe not, give or take a couple, but the client onboarding part of it is they go through the sales process. We have always had a customer success manager. I made that mandatory in every company I've ever worked with. You have to have a good handle on, any sort of customer email, but we just have a really quick onboarding, but it really does depend. We have a self-serve option on Stated. So those clients don't want to talk to us. They just want to know that it's like, if they pay too much initially, they're like, get us a better deal. We're ready to scale. And so that's when the sales team comes in. We have a client success manager, and then we have like 2 software engineers who just sit in the background, who don't do as much client communication forward facing, but they're the ones that really deep dive into the data and can answer those like technical questions, because a lot of it is data quality issues versus we've had like 1 or 2 billing issues in 3 or 4 years. Our churn on average is like between 1% and 2%, 2% being very high, usually sub 1%. So that's where the B2B part changed a lot too, is like our churn, B2C was like 15 to 20% churn. You go to B2B and we're like 1% to 2%. And so such a massive difference for us. And the goal is just to keep them happy. We find a lot of our churn in 2022, which is probably a little bit higher this year. We're probably kind of closer to that 2% versus last year we were probably sub 1%. We're seeing that, how would I say this properly? The markets are changing, and a lot of like Series A and Series B companies who we focus on working with can't get funding, or they're getting to the end of their funding and then they're like, something's happening. The market is just like, every day we get worse and worse news. And so this year we've seen churn, and we're like, it has nothing to do with us. It's everything to do with the market. And it's not detrimental in any way, I'd say, but it's like, it's definitely one of those things where you just have to like learn as you go.
So, I mean, that's a good point. How do you see shifts in the market impacting the business?
I mean, man, the United States market scares the shit out of me.
Me too.
But I'd say there's 2 points that give me faith that I'm in the right industry. Maybe 3. Number 1, you can't get rid of houses. They're here to stay. They're at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. Everyone needs one. And so that industry and the data in it is always going to be valuable. Number 2 is every single year, every single one of those houses has to be insured. I don't care if you're in a recession, in a depression, or you're in the greatest boom, bust, bubble, whatever you want to call it. Every year, 185, I think, home insurance applications are filed. So it's a big number, and it's never going anywhere. And those companies need to have data to manage their portfolios, mostly to manage risk. They need to know if a hurricane's going through a place that their total liability is X, and they pay hundreds of millions of dollars a year to do that. So I have a lot of faith in those 2 things. And then I'd say that the third thing is this, I think as we continue to shift into a more and more digital world, whether recession or depression, it's data's king. I've always believed that, like, deeply. Like, I'm like, data is where the money is at.
Smart model. And did any of those factors like play into your decision to like go into this space?
I mean, they've evolved over time. As I continue to learn about this sheer scale of these industries. But no, originally I just knew that with the B2C stuff, I was like, this data is clearly valuable to a ton of different companies. And I think that over the next 30 years, we're going to see just a massive shift in the way we look at real estate. I think we're already starting to see it with, like, in Q1 this year, 1 in 3 homes were bought by an institutional investor. That, if you rewind 5 years, that was 1 in 20.
Wow.
So you're seeing this shift of homes. And I also think you're seeing a shift of how homes are transacted on. You're seeing the Carvanas and these new websites for cars. Once those get ironed out, houses are next. It's Shopify as a house. Realtors are really questionable. I live in a pretty small town. There's maybe 100,000 people here. And we, over the last 2 years, I think we went from having about 600 realtors to 1,100. But we were selling about 1,500 houses a month at the height of the last 2 years. Last month, there were 300 houses sold. If you look at realtors in general, now we have 1,100 of them in my small little town. The top 10% of those 1,100, it's probably the top 1% actually, are going to sell those 200 homes. So that means there's 100 homes left for like 1,000 people.
Everybody else, yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, I'm like, all the services industries are going to get busy again. But, there's going to not be so many labor shortages here. But when I think about just the way that's shifting, I realize how useless realtors are. I am not a qualified realtor, and I have acted as my own buyer agent on the last 3 houses I've bought. And only I had one complicated transaction where I brought a realtor in who I trusted. But I just personally think that, like, in a decade from now, technology is going to replace these people. Not a lot of, if you're buying a house, $1 million house, and you have to pay $60,000 to a realtor, you're going to be like, oh, but I could just do this with the iBuyer model that, like, is still getting fleshed out, but it's there.
I have a question for you, since you dabble in this or are focused in this space, right? Why do all realtors think we want to see pictures of them everywhere we go?
That's a fantastic question. Oh my God. What's that movie? I Love You, Man, when he kind of does the skit for his buddy and he's got all these terrible realtor ads and they're just hilarious with, like, Paul Rudd.
I wondered that. Yeah, no, that's funny.
That is a great question, man. Honestly, I think a lot of it's ego driven, but I think a lot of it is also, how do you get to be that 1%?
Yeah.
That I was just talking about. I've always been a huge fan of that 1% because I'm like, when you talk to those people, I'm like, you're quality. Like, you know what you're doing. But it's the person that just went and took the 3-month course, passed a math exam, and was like, I'm a great realtor. And I'm like, you've never even bought a house before. You're the last person I want representing you. And it's always like, and there's so much nepotism baked into it. Oh, but like, my wife's brother's, girlfriend is a realtor, so you should totally use her. Or my mom's aunt's brother is a realtor, so you should use them. And I'm like, qualify these people. You need to go way deeper than that. Like, know that they've owned and transacted on hundreds of homes, because they're taking a huge cut of this. Like, the first time home buyer, every time they see that fee, they're pissed. So I think it's just ego driven, and probably it's competitive, man. They know that to get to that 1%, the 1% always has the shitty ads, unless they've been around for like 50 years.
I think that some of those things you just mentioned are telltale signs of industries that are ripe for like a technology takeover, right? Where they just don't do business in a real smart and efficient, effective way. It's the nepotism. It's the, oh, well, you should work with this person because I know them, right? It's like, where's your value prop, right? So when you can deliver a solution that gives value to the user, not like just like, oh, well, because Again, just, observations. We're getting a little off point, but I
It's
would
an
look for,
expensive. It's an expensive value prop, though.
yeah.
Like, if you bought a house, you know how much it costs. You're like,
Oh,
hey.
for sure. That's why it's interesting that there hasn't been the big, technology disruption. Like you said, the Carvana, once that's ironed out, and that's probably the case, is figuring the model and making sure it's rock solid before that happens. But I think that's very interesting prediction.
It's here. I think that Open Door. I think that I think Zillow's going to come back into it hard too.
Yeah.
They had a big iBuyer program that they shut down last year, but I don't think like Open Door, Purple Bricks, those companies are going to figure it out. It's like a 1.5% commission model. It's so much better than paying 6%.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, so big changes coming. I would like to just go back to Techstars for a little bit. We've had quite a few founders that have gone through the experience. Just would love to hear what it was like for you. What were the big takeaways?
Techstars was probably one of the most valuable experiences I've ever had. If you have an opportunity to go into that program, they get like 10,000 applications for one program in Boulder. So like to be the top 10 companies that get picked for that are is pretty incredible.
Wow.
And I'd say my biggest takeaways from Techstars, number one was getting taught what OKRs are. So like that's kind of the Google framework that John Doerr wrote a book about called Measure What Matters. That is mandatory reading. You're not allowed to even like talk to me if you're my employee unless you've read that book. Like that's like your first week, like read that whole book.
Yeah.
And so we've operated our company on OKRs ever since. And I even operate like my own personal life on it to some extent with quarterly OKRs. And it's been writing out your goals, setting measurable, components for those, knowing what the results are that you want to get to and having those ahead of time. It took us about, I'd say 3 years to get to the point where we could do annual OKRs. We started with quarterly for about 1.5 years and they were useless. We just constant failures. Then I think it was when COVID hit, I had an excuse to be like, I was like, hey team, we're going to monthly OKRs because I'm not going to see you anymore at the office every day. And I don't like the quarterly time span with like the weekly check-in. I'm like, we're doing daily check-ins and weekly check-ins and we're doing monthly OKRs from now on out. What we will do is we'll just set like just objectives, not even results for quarterly, but it increased the cadence of our company a lot. Now we've shifted back to quarterly OKRs that after a certain period, after about 2 years, I'd say, because we're feeling comfortable with where the company was at. But OKRs being number one. Number two, the importance of mentorship. They have this thing called Mentor Madness. They run you through like 300, 400 people on the first week at Techstars, and they pair you up with like 3 to 5 mentors. And they are just, resumes, incredible resumes. Every single person that comes through Techstars, and I still talk to a lot of those people today. My actual instructor, like the teacher of Techstars, Natty Zola, is my board member, and I talk to him all day, every day. And I guess maybe not every day, but like we are very close. And so he's been incredibly valuable through my entire journey. Foundry Group as well. They introduced and then I'd say another huge factor is that if you want introductions to venture capital, their network of venture capital is like, you get a stamp of approval when you go through Techstars.
Yeah.
Like your company passport is like when you show up, to a majority of investors across the United States, they are extremely familiar with Techstars, and that's a huge stamp of approval for your company. So that was good. I think they also taught me about the initial documentation set up for your company for fundraising and just constant pursuit of it, like education. Like Techstars was daily new courses to learn new things, and they push you really hard on that and to constantly be iterating and constantly be learning. Last thing that I'd say is just like, don't be afraid of failure. Techstars is like, you're like 3.5 months with a bunch of companies that like every single day or week, someone's like trying something and massively failing. And so you kind of get over that fear of failure. I know in Canada, it's like very different. A lot of the entrepreneurs I meet are extremely afraid of it. Then I go to places in America and it's like this badge of honor failure. I'd like to kind of put myself in the middle, more of like, I don't think failure is the greatest thing in the world, but I think you just have to like quickly learn from it, keep moving forward, get those wins. As your company gets bigger and bigger, I actually would say you get less and less wins, but it's like your 10 losses to your one massive win is so much better. So you just kind of learn to accept failure a little bit in Techstars. Oh, and the last one is they make you public speak. I just speak in front of 1,300 people. 26-year-old kid, never spoke in my life. My first time, 1,300 people, like pit stains, dying. But I survived, and we got some money after, which is great. But I wouldn't say they train you for public speaking that well, but they train you how to do your pitch. But then there's a big difference between a 10-minute pitch and then public speaking. Yeah. And making them flow and nice. I did not have that flow. That thing's pretty choppy.
That's cool. No, those are some fantastic takeaways there. We've heard a lot of similar stories like the mentorship and, fantastic program. So that's really cool to hear. Love to hear a little bit about the team. Just, what does the team look like? What are the different roles and how has it evolved over time?
Yeah, I think we're also a very small team. So I think we're 18 people. I outsourced almost all my marketing. So that's a big one. I think we have about 10 or 11 software engineers, a couple data analysts. I run with 2 finance people because I complicate things. But it's always been really valuable. We kind of have like the accountant bookkeeping, and then we have like an FIT, like financial and planning expert. But really small team. Aside from that, customer success person, we only have 1 salesperson. I'm still heavy in sales. I am the salesperson. And I've always had a number 2 technical person right beside me. He's been with me since about a year into me starting as an entrepreneur. I think I convinced him when it was like 18 months after I went. I was like, dude, you got to quit your job and come join the company. Let's make some stuff. And so he's been with me ever since. And he's a quiet one. You'll never see him on camera. And I'm the sales and marketing guy. And that's it was like kind of a match made in heaven in, 2013, 2014.
Very cool. So is that where you spend the majority of your time these days in sales and marketing?
Yeah. And customer success.
Okay.
And I think as your company gets to we're at, a few million in ARR, I deal with a little bit of people. We don't have anyone in HR yet. We're fully remote. I try and keep it pretty lightweight. I have an assistant who helps me as well. And so people, strategic planning would be the only other things that I would add in there. But customer success, marketing, sales has really always been my bread and butter.
Cool. Speaking of strategic planning, where do you see the business in, let's say, 3 years? What is on the roadmap? What are you planning for? And what are you looking to make happen?
So 2025, the goal is to get to 10 million in ARR. Probably get acquired for some sort of 9-figure exit. That's been my strategy all along. I think there's some other opportunities that could come within that. But yeah, so we have to do about 3x our revenue, which I think is totally possible. I think the economic climate says a lot too. One of the things that I've learned as an entrepreneur is that we're profitable, which is very rare for a startup of our size. Most venture companies, and Foundry doesn't even always agree with me on this, but they want grow or die. And for me, I was always I'm afraid of what could happen in the future. And so I was if we're profitable, we're fine though, right? We can just do cost cutting, break even, be really smart with our funds. And so I care less about having massive growth over the next 2 years. So whether or not we 3x, if it's 3 years or 5 years, whatever it might be, I care more about survival, because these are the times when the true colors of a lot of companies show. I can't tell you how many fundraising efforts I've seen in the last 90 days that have went to shit. And these founders are all excited. We're going to get this big round of funding, yada, yada, yada. And boom, it's over. Oh, one of our investors lost all their money, or one of our, market scare, something happened. The stock market's red again. They're dying. Private equity, public rounds, funding, acquisitions, everything around us is falling apart. And so I think that the goal of the next 2 years is survival. because the companies that survive will come out so fucking strong. They always do. And so you have to be profitable. You can't be burning cash. You're not going to be able to get good loans because interest rates are so high and VCs are tightening up. You have to be a really solid company to go and get that capital now. And if you had an acquisition in play, you might as well write that off until like 2025. So over the next few years, as much as I'd love to get to 10 million by 2025, I think that, the number one goal is be smart financially and make sure that there's like no risk.
Sounds like a sound plan. That's great. Before I ask my kind of final wrap-up question, Josh, where can people find out more about, you, Estated, follow you guys?
Estated.com/the blog is where I spend a lot of my time as well. I have a content writer now. Our newsletter gets a lot of great feedback. We talk about all the prop tech rounds pretty much every single week. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at JG Fraser. And then Estated has all of its own handles as well for everything. We were publishing a lot on YouTube, but then I kind of got tired of YouTube because I had to be on it all the time. That might come back here at some point, but we do have a lot of content on there as well. But we do kind of two big things every week. We do a Funding Friday email, which is like every single funding round in the prop tech industry. Also been good lead gen for us because people see us talking about them. And then we just do a weekly newsletter on like cool data, whatever's on our minds that week. And there's lots, whether it's foreclosure activity or sale activity, whatever might be happening. And so at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of data nerds putting content together. And, people give it very good feedback. A lot of effort goes into it.
It's great. Sounds like it. That's fantastic. To wrap up our conversation, the question we like to throw out there is, if we were to have this conversation before you started the business, if you were to go back in time and have this conversation with your former self, I should say, sit down, have a cup of coffee, what is the one piece of advice that you'd give to your former self just about to dive into this venture?
Oh, that's a big question. It would relate to, I've always believed in not reinventing the wheel, but just trying to improve it. So like in my head, like the Carfax for homes, it was like copy Carfax, put a spin on it. I think I just would have probably consulted with more people. I would have tried to get into Techstars earlier. We're also a part of Dan Martell's SaaS Academy. I 100% would have joined that earlier. Dan Martell's become a good friend, and I've learned so much from him, as well as my mentors from Techstars. I've learned so much from them. So I think I always was very bullish on mentorship. But if I had to tell myself one thing when I was 20 again, I would have been go even deeper into it. Get as many mentors as you can and stay in touch with them for as long as you can, because there will be weird times when they will pay dividends, and it's the hard times when they come in and they're invaluable to you. And the best part about mentorship is I've heard so much about coaching. SaaS Academy is paid, but Dan is also giving me endless amounts of advice outside of that. As well as Techstars has stock in our company, endless amounts of free advice over the years that I don't feel like I had to pay for. And then I just have countless other mentors that have helped me through things that, they could charge a lot of money for. But just because I've nurtured a relationship over the last 8 years, I think I would have just went way deeper into that. I probably have 10 or 15 that are amazing, but if I could have 50 in that Rolodex, it's kind of an old thing to say, but it is kind of an old school thing. And I don't think people need a CEO coach or a life coach. It's mentors want to help each other. A lot of CEOs I know are I hired a CEO coach and I pay him $50,000 a year. I'm that's crazy. What? A mentor is supposed to help you. They're just these are old guys that are and women that are very wealthy, and they have time and they like to give back. Those are the type of people I like to be around versus the coaches. I would warn people to be critical of coaching.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And I've had a few people on that have praised their coaches. I've had someone on that he was going to a relationship therapist. him and his wife, like totally unrelated to business, but was so helpful in that regard that that person moved over to become the business coach. So different people have different needs and figuring things out. But yeah, interesting perspective. And I get
It's
it.
a fantastic point. I've had a therapist for about 5 years going strong, because I knew after about 3 years, I started to see like, and the cracks in it. Like, every human has their flaws. And I like, my employees started to bring up my flaws. As your head gets bigger and bigger as your company does better and better. And so I'm also a huge fan of therapy. I think that every single person on the planet should have a therapist. Find one that you like and talk about that stuff. And I call her my brain coach, because it's relationships, it's work, it's personal, it's everything. But once you get to know someone like that, and it takes years, I'd say literally years, for you to get to a point where you can actually see great progress. But I think I've pretty much forced my entire team to meet my therapist so that they understand me a little bit better.
That's cool.
Yeah, but it's I'm a huge fan. That is one thing that I totally recommend paying for.
Awesome. Yeah, the human condition is a pretty complicated thing. So
You got to be good up here to succeed anywhere else. It's hard to be good up here 24/7.
I totally agree with that. Well, Josh, this has been fantastic. I appreciate your time. Awesome story that you have. And again, really great talking to you. Everybody check him out, estated.com. Take a look at the blog. It looks like they're putting out a lot of great content. So again, Josh Fraser, really appreciate your time. And to those of you tuning in, check it out. And we will see you again in a couple weeks. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.